Every night, after a hard day's work, the engines on the Northwestern Railway like to settle in for a good night's rest. Like any person, engines need sleep every night, but this is a lavish luxury for the ocean-going ships. Having to be at sea for months on end, any ocean-going vessel will tell you that the ocean can be a dangerous place, not to be taken lightly. As such, the only time afforded for sleeping comes when a ship is docked and at anchor. This ship, the John Cuba, was in the final stretch of a 3-month voyage from the land down under. He would be moored at Brendam Docks for one night, before being sent back to his homeland. He was very used to long voyages such as this. These long voyages were so common that he could count the exact number of times he had been afforded a full night's rest since the June of 1958, 587 nights' rests. That alone would alienate him from his peers, however few he had. But there was something else more unusual than that. He could recall every dream that entertained him as he slept from his first night of consciousness. He remembered it vividly. It had only been a few seconds since he had closed his eyes when the warm atmosphere of the Australian summer gave way to the chill of sub-zero desolation. Slowly, John opened his eyes to find himself in a snowy bay with men rushing to and fro on his deck. He could not recall visiting such a location, but he knew it was an unmapped Arctic island in 1933. As he inspected his surroundings, he noticed a strange stone structure overlooking the bay. It looked ancient in the same vein as Stonehenge. The crew were watching two men haul large sacks across the deck, spilling out multiple artifacts. As the crew gathered around the treasure, John could make out a solitary figure standing on the bow of the ship. It was a man in a pilot's uniform, with 4 crossed-out airplanes on his jacket. He'd never seen a pilot before, but somehow he knew that this was what one would look like. As he pondered what a pilot was doing in full flight gear in the middle of the Arctic, he felt a shift in his surroundings. The light began to glimmer brighter until his surroundings gave way to a bright white void. That was the way it was for most of his dreams. Anywhere it was, at any time. He could just tell. He was so confident of this that he believed he could navigate from Sydney to Gibraltar without a map. He never tried this, though. He was smarter than that. But this place was different. He couldn't recall seeing this island in any dream. Through the fog, he could see the lights of the harbor getting closer as the beam of the lighthouses helped guide him around the peninsulas to his destination. It wasn't long before he was docked and being unloaded. Goods and essentials were being removed from his cargo holds and onto trains, being ready to take them to various shops and markets that dotted the lines deep inland. When the cargo was unloaded, the crew began to disembark. Not long after the crew had left, he began to hear footsteps making their way towards the deck from inside his hull. This didn't make sense to John. There was not supposed to be any sailors still on board. His crew was to be changed out with another for the return journey to Sydney any minute. He wasn't left alone wondering for long, as the source of the footsteps soon came into view. It was the same pilot from his first dream. He walked over to a railing and rested on it, staring out into the harbor. A few minutes went by until John finally worked up the nerves to break the silence.
"What are you doing here?"
"Waiting for an old friend. Me and him have some unfinished business. Should be arriving any minute." Almost on cue, a double-decker bus pulled up to the dock carrying a ship's worth of sailors. When the last crewman had stepped off the bus, an unshaven man in a captain's uniform stepped out and took a long look at the old ship. "There he is. I'll have to give him a proper greetings later."
"Why not say hello now?"
"If there's anything I've learned from being a pilot, it's that you have to catch your quarry by surprise." And with that, the pilot disappeared out of view, with crewmen soon taking his place to begin the long loading process. After a long and tedious process of loading china clay into the cargo holds, the crew were treating themselves to a night of drinking before the arduous journey across the world. It was late before the crew began to turn in for the night. John was beginning to fall asleep when he saw a man stumbling around on the deck. It was unusual, but John paid no heed. He was used to sailors getting drunk in the port.
We'll be sorted out in the morning.
And with that, John fell asleep. In this dream, he found himself in a dry dock with walls being built on his hull, eventually blocking out all natural light from his view. Work continued for some time, finishing sometime around 1941 at Tidmouth Harbor. For some time, he sat silently in the dark room before part of the ceiling came down, with a small plane resting on a platform. He would see many more like it rolled into the room, packed closely to be refueled and rearmed before ascending back up the elevator and out of sight. This would happen on a daily basis. Airplanes would be fueled up and rolled onto the elevator, only to come back down later that day with holes dotting their fuselage. Sometimes they would never come back at all. After each airplane was rolled back into the hangar, workmen would look over the aircraft to check and make repairs. It was one evening where the hangar deck was empty, except for two men arguing near an airplane with a smoking engine.
What do you mean, a bloody oversight? I could have died.
It was just an engine trouble. Could have happened to any one of you flyboys.
If you call that engine trouble, I hate to see what you call an engine failure.
Calm down. We'll have this fixed as soon as we are able.
Did you not hear the radio? The war ended today. I missed out on my last chance of a final kill because of you. I could have been an ace, but due to your laziness...
A large crash sounded as the pilot fell to the floor, hitting his head against the lid of a fuel canister and getting knocked out cold. The workman lit a cigarette and took a drag.
Best have one before the court-martial.
The man walked off towards one of the hatch doors to the outer reaches of the ship, throwing his cigarette behind him as he left the room. Through the darkness, John could make out the solitary glow of the cigarette butt, a gentle rocking of the ship, rolling it from side to side. It was after a few minutes that it had rolled near the unconscious airman. In the darkness, he could make out a shining substance on the floor near the body. John prayed that he hadn't been hurt, and that he would get up and walk his injury off, but he didn't. The cigarette kept rolling back and forth, closer to the substance, before finally coming into contact. No sooner had it done that, did the substance catch fire and spread throughout the hangar. At that moment, John realized. The substance wasn't blood, but aviation fuel. The fire continued to spread to the tank where the unconscious airman lay. In that moment, John knew he had to do something. Anything.
Fire! Help! Fire!
But no one came. The fire continued to spread until it reached the fuel tank. John saw a bright flash before waking back up in the docks he had called his home for the past night. John didn't know what to think. He had never had a dream so horrible. He now felt uncomfortable staying in this harbor any longer, and wanted to return to his homeland. So he waited. And as he waited, the crewmen began their final preparations. But something was different than usual. They weren't untying the ropes or securing the hatches. They seemed to be looking for something. Eventually, one of them came up to John.
Have you seen the captain?
No, why do you ask?
Nobody's seen him since last night. He went on deck while we were all drinking and vanished.
I saw someone on the deck last night, near the cargo hold. So the crew investigated and found the captain laying at the bottom of the cargo hold, dead, with 5 markings on his coat, 4 airplanes, and 1 person, all crossed out. Nobody knows what happened that fateful night, but John has his suspicions. He still sails the oceans between England and Australia, but he refuses to return to that little island, for he fears to have another encounter with the undead Ace.